Like and subscribe to Dana Walsh channel, guys. Let's do this. Let's get over 5 subscribers.
For a mini stay-at-home vacation from work. I live in a very rural area, about an hour from the city. Honestly, I hadn't really taken these days off for any particular reason. I guess I was just feeling like I needed a break. It was on my first day off as I stayed at home and watched TV, among doing some other small things around the house. Around dinner time though, a knock came from the front door. I sat up from the couch and looked at the clock, seeing it was 7 p.m. It was strange for anyone to be at my house in general, but given the time as well, it was even more so. I walked up to the door and cracked it open. A man was on the doorstep, smiling at me. He looked like any other guy, no special features or anything. "What do you need?" I asked, looking around behind him and noticing no car or truck in my driveway. The man maintained his smile as he went through a whole scenario he was in just a few minutes ago. He said he was on the road that connected to my driveway when someone slammed into his car and drove off, leaving him stranded and having to come to me for help. The way he described it, and just from looking at him, things didn't seem to add up. My driveway was far from the road, and the chances he got into an accident right by the entrance was almost zero on such an empty road. I told him I'd call the police for him if he'd like, but the man declined. He said he wanted to borrow my phone to call his wife. It took me a few seconds to respond, because being unsure about the situation made me nervous to say no to him. I said I would call the police and that was it, but the man's smile went away as he said don't worry about it and walked away from the porch. I closed the door, then looked out the window as the man walked down the driveway and disappeared in the dark. After a moment, I called the police just to be safe. About 20 minutes later though, I got a call back from them saying there were no signs of any crashes on the road. I stayed up late that night, looking out the windows and just being overall a little bit uneasy. But once it got to around 12, I was too tired to stay up. I went upstairs to my bedroom and got ready, then got in bed and fell fast asleep. I remember waking up frantically, but not understanding why. Like maybe I'd heard something in my sleep, but didn't wake up fast enough to comprehend it. Looking over, it was about 3 a.m. I got up from my bed and walked over to the door so I could listen for any sounds in the rest of the house. It was mostly quiet, but I could hear a slight rustling sound from somewhere outside. I carefully walked down the stairs to check on it, thinking it was probably just a bush brushing against the house. But as I got to the downstairs hallway, I realized the sound was moving. It was going along the edge of the house and toward the front. I felt my heart start racing as I tried to reassure myself everything was okay, but then the rustling stopped, and only a moment later, there was a knock at the door. I stood still at the end of the hallway and stared at the front door, terrified of whoever was out there. After a few seconds, I moved away and up to a small window on the side of the house that had a view of the porch. Through the blinds, I could see two men, both in dark clothing, and both holding something in their hands. It looked like tools or weapons of some kind. My eyes widened in fear as I backed away and quietly walked back up to my room. More knocking echoed through the house as I called the police and locked myself in. As I stayed on the phone, the knocks turned into banging thuds. I immediately knew it was what I feared. They were trying to break the door down. Hit after hit, non-stop for over 5 minutes, they banged on the door, shaking the whole house. Then the operator on the phone finally said an officer was pulling up to my house, and at that same time, all the banging stopped. When the cop pulled up though, he said he didn't see any men at my door. They must have run off just before he could see them. The door, however, was barely hanging on. The wood was bent and splintered, with only the bolt lock still in place. I was lucky that the police were able to show up quick enough, but I guess I was also smart to have not helped that one man. I'm assuming if I had, I would have only accelerated their plans to do.
I'm a female, and at the time this story occurred, I was 15. My best friend Ellie would spend a lot of time in my house. I kinda just assumed that this was because she had 2 younger siblings that she didn't really get along with well, and the father wasn't in the picture and their mom was gone most of the time. Every weekend, Ellie would stay at my house. On this particular weekend, I'd asked Ellie if maybe we could stay at her house instead. I was just kind of wanting a break from my parents, and I had never stayed over at Ellie's house before. Her mother said that it would be fine and that she wasn't going to be home much anyway. We went to Ellie's house straight after school on a Friday. We sat down on the couch and we had watched some TV for a bit. After a while, we decided we wanted a snack and we went into the kitchen to see what we could find. They had a side door and their kitchen was open with a screen on the outside. I was very startled when I saw a man standing in front of the screen door, looking inside. He looked to be in his late 30s and he was really dirty and shaggy looking. I actually wondered if he was homeless. Once we made direct eye contact with him, he then said,
Well, hello there, young ladies.
Dave, Ellie said. She told this guy Dave that her mom wasn't there. The man replied back,
Yeah, she never is. Who's your little friend here?
He asked as he creepily looked me up and down. She told him I was her friend and that we were just hanging out having a sleepover. Ellie seemed uncomfortable, and I was too. He stood there for a moment just smiling at us when he then said,
So are boys allowed? I'm sure a couple of cuties like you have boyfriends coming over.
We grew increasingly uncomfortable, and Ellie told him that she had to watch her brother and sister for the night, and that her mom would be home later. I knew that wasn't true, though. Her siblings were staying at her dad's that weekend, and her mom would be going out with her boyfriend, so most likely she wouldn't be coming home. The man was still standing at the door smiling at us. He then said,
Oh well, I guess. Tell your mom I stopped by. See you sexy ladies later.
When the man walked away, I asked Ellie what was that all about. She told me that Dave was her neighbor. Apparently her mom had gone on a date with him several years ago when they first moved in. Her mother wasn't impressed with Dave, and there was no second date. She said that he was cheap, had bad hygiene, not at all interesting, and was far too forward sexually. I guess this Dave character would stop by frequently trying to get the mom's attention and then flirt with her, much to everyone in the household's dismay. Ellie also said in the last couple of years he seemed to start taking more interest in her, even making the horrific comment about how she's grown up enough to wear bras now, and suggesting that she should come over in a bikini to sunbathe on his deck. I was totally horrified. What a creep. We tried to relax some and forget about the creepy neighbor. We ate some junk food, watched some of our favorite shows, and also took some quizzes out of teen magazines. It was getting dark and we were starting to want dinner, so we ordered a large cheese pizza. Not even 10 minutes later, after the pizza had arrived, there was a knock at the front door. We were both really surprised as it was going on 9 p.m. at this point, and we weren't expecting anyone. Ellie got up and looked out the peephole. She looked right back at me wide-eyed. She put her finger up to her mouth and told me to be quiet. There was another knock at the door, then a voice. It was Dave.
Girls, I know you're home,
he said. We were both frozen in fear. Then Dave the creep said something
He's such a creep, man. What the hell?
And so he thought he'd bring us a large sausage. Yeah, I know. Cringe.
You don't be like that with people, man. That's weird.
We went around the house closing all the blinds and
Like and subscribe, guys, if you want more of this.
the TV up and kept the room lit with one tiny dim lamp out of fear of Dave seeing or hearing us. Once it got to be around 10:30, we were really fed up with having to sit still in the dark. Ellie got up and peeked out the window at Dave's house. She said that all of his lights were off, so he probably went out or went to bed. We felt comfortable enough to turn on some lights and relax a bit, so we put on some music and chatted some. We were sitting on the piano bench in front of the dining room windows when all of a sudden we then heard a tapping outside the window. I guess we had only closed the shades halfway, because when we looked over, you guessed it, there was Dave peeking in. He held up a 6-pack of beer saying that he knew Ellie's mom wasn't home, and that we should let him in so we could all party together. I guess Ellie had enough at this point, because she stood up and yelled at him, "No!" and that he needed to leave. Dave had a completely blank look on his face, and then he said,
You know I can just come in, right?
Ellie then yelled at him that she had spoken with her mom and she was calling the police. Well, at that point,
I've got the creepiest story.
This spooky story submission is actually so terrifying that it led to the person who was telling me the story to end up in the
This is a story of my best friend and what her life is like with a stalker. This will be the abridged version, but still will be long. She knew of him through a mutual friend, and he lived in Delaware. We lived in Tennessee. He came to visit
I hate creeps like this, guys. There's no need for stalking and all that lot.
Don't put that shit on me.
to them dating. He admitted he moved here because he wanted to be closer to her, even though they weren't romantically involved at the time. Before they had ever dated, he asked her what she wanted for her birthday. She said that she likes stars, so just something with stars on it. And he literally bought her a star in the sky and named it Terra. It was also accompanied with a very intense and creepy love letter. She didn't see it as a warning sign, and she liked the attention. I told her that it was overboard and creepy. The first week of them dating, he began going through her phone and purse at every opportunity. She was furious about this and told him her phone is private. She said he should only snoop if he has a good reason to do so, not just because he wants to keep tabs on who she texts. She puts a lock on her phone, but it doesn't take long for him to figure out the lock code. He didn't admit to going through her phone again, but she knew he was, because he would always seem to bring up a person that may have texted her that day, or the subject that was spoken of. Some phone numbers of her closest guy friends had been changed in her phone as well. He wouldn't let her go anywhere without him. He would make plans with her for every single day of the week, and then make her promise to follow through with the plans, even though they lived together. If she ever went back on the plans because something else came up that she wanted to do, he would throw a bit of a fit and say she's a liar because she didn't keep her promise. It was things like she had promised to eat dinner at home with him, small things. He would often react violently. She became increasingly agitated with this controlling and smothering behavior, and told him that she wanted to go have girl time with me, that she needs some breathing space for a night. He made her promise to let him come if we hung out with other people. About an hour before she was coming to meet me, I got a phone call from a friend that had moved across the country. He was in town and wanted to see me. I told him that I would have a friend with me that night, but we'd swing by his house for about an hour if she was okay with it. I asked Tara if she's cool with it, and she says of course. A few minutes later, I got a text from him asking if he could come, because of the promise that Tara had made to him. I said, I'm sorry, but I don't think it's acceptable. This is a friend that I haven't seen in several years, and I'm already taking one person over to his mom's house that he doesn't know. It would be rude to bring another. And we're only staying there for about an hour anyways. A few minutes after, Tara texts and says she's walking out her door. She never makes it to my house. I called and texted but couldn't get to her. I finally got one text from her that just said, help. I immediately drove to her apartment, where I found her on her balcony. He had stolen her phone and locked her on her balcony so she couldn't leave. They broke up for a while, and I guess out of being lonely, she got back with him. One night, he bursted through my front door unannounced because he hadn't talked to Tara in 30 minutes. She went to dinner with a family friend, and he was following her and spying on her. Her phone had died, and he panicked when he lost track of her. He freaked out in my living room, and I also found out that he had saved the numbers of all the guys she had in her phone. I told him he was not allowed to be near me again, even if Tara was with him. He seemed to act normal for a while until Tara became pregnant. He was ecstatic, and she was scared. After about a week, she started getting excited about being a parent. That was until she started adding some things up. Her birth control had mysteriously vanished, not long before she got pregnant. He was giving her vitamins every day and watching her take them. He said she needed to take them because she's anemic. When she looked up the pills, they were for fertility. She also remembered a few times when he said he was wearing a condom, and she didn't think it felt like one was there. He had been trying to get her pregnant. She understandably chose to not keep the baby after finding this out, and she was terrified of him after this. He would have used that baby as a way to get to Tara. It would have meant nothing more to him. They split again. He still lived in their apartment after they split, and she would drop by here and there to get some of her stuff. He seemed to be handling things okay until Thanksgiving. He threw her all over the apartment when she stopped by for stuff. That night, he said he was going to spend the night out of town in Nashville, that he needed Tara to stay there and watch his puppy. She made sure it had food and water, but didn't want to be there in case he came back. He did. At 1 a.m., she gets dozens of phone calls from him. He was never in Nashville. He was just trying to get her alone, and flipped his shit when she wasn't there. He sent her 115 texts that all said, respond to me. He began driving by her work and house all the time. He would call and text her incessantly. He told her that he isn't promising his sanity or her safety, and that he would kill her. He started taking her mail even. I told her that I would go get her mail for her, but he said he wouldn't give it to me. He'd only give it to her if she came in person. He began threatening me and saying that it was my fault. Yes, I had encouraged her to get away from him. He was insane, and everyone was scared for her. She was living at my house because he didn't know where I lived at the time. I finally decided to treat him like a kid, and I called his mother in Delaware. I told her of his behavior and threats and asked if she could help him. He ended up moving back to Delaware, but would still call and text Tara all the time. He also made sure to bash her to every person she knew. He would come back to town often, and he would go everywhere he knew she would go. He would go places where her friends worked. He would drive by her work. He would send her gifts, and sometimes she'd see him waiting outside of places she was at. It finally stopped, though. She had a year of silence from him, and she had even moved to a different state with the guy she was dating. Her and her new boyfriend split, and she moved back home to Tennessee and started working at a hotel. He once came into her hotel and bought a room for the night. The next morning, he checked out and drove back to Delaware. He drove 12 hours to stay at her hotel for one night, and then turned around and went back. He sent her a text a few months ago saying he's moving back here. For several years, she was constantly on edge. She gets nervous if she sees a car like his, and she has a genuine fear that he will hurt her if he gets the opportunity. She thinks he'll kill her one day, and I'm also afraid of that as well. She has numerous police reports over this guy, and I hate seeing how he's damaged her, and she's afraid to get close to another guy. She doesn't want kids now, and she's always nervous. We still use the buddy system. She doesn't go anywhere at all by herself. It only takes one moment of her being alone for him to get her. This is
I was out doing a delivery one late night. It was probably the longest drive I have ever taken for a pizza delivery. From the pizza place I worked at, It was a 20-minute drive, which isn't too crazy out where I live. Plus, they ordered 4 large pies, so I figured it was a party and I would get a much bigger tip. Navigating the dirt roads at night was always annoying though. I pulled up to the given address. It was some old, sketchy-looking building, literally in the middle of a forest clearing. There were no cars parked anywhere, or any lights on. I put my car in park and called my boss. I asked him to reread the address at least 3 times to make sure I typed it in right, but that checked out. I could tell he was in a really bitchy mood, and he told me to at least knock on the door and check it out. He would normally get mad if we took back 1 pie, but I was afraid of what he would do if I brought back 4. I was insanely unnerved, but got out anyway and forced myself to the front door of the building. There was no doorbell, so I just knocked really hard. I heard nothing and didn't really expect to hear anything. I was extremely disappointed, not because nobody answered the door, but because I was realizing that it was all a waste of time and gas. I knocked 1 more time out of desperation, and then began to hear some kind of rustling noises from inside of the building. I knocked again and yelled that I was the pizza guy. There was silence now. I felt a bit more uncomfortable now than before. But before I could turn around, I noticed something at the window. There was someone looking through the window. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. All I noticed were their eyes. Their eyes were open wider than I knew possible, staring intently at me. I was disturbed enough by this and dropped the pizzas and ran back to my car. The shitty thing wouldn't start until turning the key for the 3rd time. I drove off the grass and back onto the dirt road, but I felt the car rocking about, shaking and bumping. Something wasn't right. I didn't make it far from the building before I started hearing a sharp scraping sound coming from outside. There was so much resistance that I couldn't even drive. The car came to a stop. I got out of the car to check what the hell was wrong. A chill ran up my spine as I began to feel like my heart was constantly skipping beats. My tires had been slashed and had completely fallen off the rim. Not just the front though. All 4 tires were slashed. I realized somebody did this when I was knocking on the door to that building. Instead of running, I got back in the car and locked the doors. I was so close to that building, I could practically see it from where I was, if it weren't for the trees blocking the view. I dialed 911 and explained everything to the operator. She told me the cops would be over as soon as possible and that I need to stay hidden. I asked her if it was advisable to stay in the car or run, and she told me it would be best to stay in the car with the door locked. She asked me to stay on the line with her until the cops arrived. My whole body was shaking. In all directions, there was nothing but dark, seemingly endless forest. I knew it would take forever for the cops to get there. I was not comfortable with sitting in that car so close to whoever did this. The next part, though, is what utterly destroyed me. It still shakes me to this day, and I hope nobody ever has to experience this kind of fear. As I was scanning all the windows, making sure nobody was outside, I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was the same person I saw at that window. Eyes open wider than ever. I could see now that it was a woman, and I could ever so slightly see a smile begin to spread across her face. I opened my door and full-on sprinted into the woods, not caring how much noise I made. I ran until I was out of breath, which didn't take long, and I hid behind a giant log on the ground. I tried to cover my loud breathing with my hand, as I waited and waited for what felt like hours, until I finally heard sirens in the distance. I gathered up all the stamina I had left to run all the way back in the direction of the dirt road. Eventually, The glowing red and blue lights came into view, and I had never felt better in my life. They were parked in front of my car, investigating with flashlights. I came out yelling at them like a lunatic to help me. I fell to the floor and started to gag, almost throwing up from running so much. They picked me up and began to question me, to which I explained everything to the best of my ability. One of the two cars drove over to the building, and the two officers began to search the building. They came back with nothing except for a couple of spiky objects. These objects were exactly the same as the ones used to slash my tires. The cops guessed that it was some kind of sick, demented couple, being that I saw the woman, but unfortunately they were never found, and that still kills me to this day. I obviously quit my job right after that and started working at a local grocery store. I know that I'll never forget seeing that woman at the back of my car.
It happened about a month ago when I was home alone. The world would have never witnessed what unfolded if I hadn't installed a Ring camera on my front door. It happened on a Tuesday in broad daylight. I was working from home on my laptop when I heard my doorbell ringing. As a safety precaution, I always like to check the surveillance footage to see who was out front. There stood a gentleman that looked to be in his mid-20s with a mask over his face.
Strange. Hey, he's wearing a corporate mask. What? Like and subscribe, guys.
It's rather strange, as people who do this kind of thing were typically on the younger side, but I didn't see any harm in it. I ended up entering the foyer and opening the door, only to see the same individual I saw in the camera, except he looked more deranged close up.
Hi, sir. Would you like to buy some chocolate?
How much?
How much you got? You seem like you have a nice house. You must be loaded. How about you buy all my chocolate?
Kid, you don't just come to someone's house and request—
Shut up and buy my chocolate, rich boy.
How about this? Get the hell off my property and leave me alone, or I'm calling the cops!
Get on the floor, you little shit!
And that's when I got robbed point blank. It all went down in a split second. Several bandits ambushed and robbed my house, leaving myself and the candy seller dumbfounded.
Crazy kid, what?
The story. It was later found out that the candy salesman was a part of the whole robbery scheme. He had been going to multiple houses around the neighborhood, posing as a candy salesman, only to lure people to open their front door.
A brazen robber posing to sell candy along with 3 other people are still on the loose tonight. The frightening daytime armed robbery home invasion that happened on Monday in Stockton has a lot of neighbors nervous.
What appeared to be a—
This is crazy. This is actually real.
quickly turned into a homeowner's worst nightmare. This neighbor, not the one robbed, captured video through his own Ring camera about 5 minutes earlier of the alleged candy man coming to his door. He watched a live feed on his home Ring camera as the phony candy seller came to his door.
When I was 9, I was staying home alone. It was early morning, and I had just gotten out of the shower and brushed my teeth. I put on my favorite outfit, set up a little area in the living room with a drink and a snack, and then turned on the TV to watch something. The phone rang. I went across the house to go answer it. The voice on the other end was, well, really familiar and really comforting for me. He asked me about my day so far, and he made small talk. After about a minute or so, he then said,
I like your outfit. Is pink your favorite color?
I replied back with, oh, thank you. No, it isn't.
What were you planning on watching on TV?
He asked. It took me a few seconds to understand what was happening, as I was only 9 years old and very naive. The voice on the other end of the phone then changed. It became deep and raspy and horrific. The voice then proceeded to describe all these horrible things that they wanted to do to me, and in detail. I went numb. My skin felt as if it were on fire, and my heart was racing. I had never been more terrified in my entire life. I slammed down the phone, and then I called my mom at work. I tried to explain what happened, and I'm not sure I was making much sense. She got on to me for answering the phone, and she told me to go back about my day. I remember trying to explain to her that he was watching me, and that he told me what I had been doing, and that he knew what I was wearing. I also mentioned that I was going to call 911 because I needed help. "That isn't necessary. I'm not coming home. Just don't answer the phone and go watch TV," she said, and then I hung up. I was really confused and I was scared. I could feel his eyes on me. I pulled the curtains closed and I raced around the house, torn between doing what I felt was right and doing what I had been told by my mother. This whole time the phone was ringing. The second it would stop, it would just start up yet again. The sound of the phone ringing would pulse through my entire body like electricity. It was practically paralyzing me. It was like I was frozen but also on fire at the same time. I waited for a pause in the ringing and called 911. "I'm home by myself and I'm 9 years old and someone's watching me and telling me they're gonna kill me," I told the operator. She tried to keep me calm and she said that she would send help for me. I remember standing there listening to this kind voice just trying to help me, but I could feel every scary movie scenario just playing out behind me. Was he creeping up behind me with a knife? Was he going to shoot me through a window? Was he going to throw a rock through the glass and open the door? I just didn't know. I couldn't breathe and I couldn't feel my body. In a moment of panic, I set off the alarm to the house and ran outside. I remember this sense of relief, but also this overwhelming feeling of having a separation in my reality. The house felt small and dark and really dangerous and cold. Outside felt open, as well as safe and warm. I could hear lawnmowers and the sounds of birds chirping. It was a beautiful break from that bone-chilling feeling of the phone. It was like I was watching a movie and I could see myself experience both of these environments at the same time. A neighbor was pushing his child in a swing. He was concerned. He let me stand next to him and he protected me. I could hear the sirens now, the blaring sound getting louder as they grew closer. It felt like it took an eternity, but the police finally arrived. An officer walked over to me and he asked me what happened. I did my best to explain it, but so many of the words on the phone that were used were just so embarrassing. I couldn't bring myself to use such adult words to a police officer. And his other words were just bone-chilling. I couldn't say those either. To this day, I can still hear my young voice repeating the words. He was watching me. He said he was going to kill me. Not long after, my mom's car pulled into the driveway. She, for some reason, decided to come home. She didn't look for me or come to speak to me. She just calmly got out and then walked over to the police officer. I was standing in the doorway from the house to the garage, just facing the driveway. I could see my mom and the police officer. I was watching and trying to understand, trying to figure out what was happening. Then I saw it. She was laughing. My face was swollen from tears, my heart still racing, and my skin was on fire. And my mom was laughing? What the hell was going on? Very slowly, I crept a little closer, and I then overheard. "I'm so sorry about this. I guess she just got scared being home alone and overreacted. I'm really sorry. What the hell's happening? What did I do wrong? Did I imagine this? Was this a dream? Should I not have called 911? Did I actually overreact?" My memory of what happened after that is a little hazy. I remember refusing to stay home alone and the sound of the phone ringing just rippling through my body. It wasn't something I liked discussing. I refused to repeat what had been said to me by the voice on the phone. My mom decided that she knew who did it, but she didn't even know the details. There was no investigation. No one was questioned. She told me it was a boy who was the same age as me who lived across the street. I knew that was impossible, but no matter how much I protested it, I was always told that it was him. Many years later, after I was an adult with my own children, we were at Christmas. Everyone was in the living room and I had gone into the back bedroom to change a diaper. As I was walking out of the room and back into the living room, I could hear my mom laughing, her voice as if she had been telling a joke. The faces of everyone else in the room told a different story. discomfort, anguish, shock, fear, yet she was still laughing. It felt as if I was walking in slow motion. One of my older children had actually stopped me from entering the living room and sort of pushed me back into the room that I had just come out of. She just told the story of you being home alone and the man threatening to kill you. She told it like it was a joke or something, like some funny story from your childhood. My child told me. To this day, I never learned who it was that called me. I deal.
That's it now, guys. Like and subscribe if you want more.